Welcome to World Gone Weird, where we try to figure out just what the heck is going on. And today, folks, it's like someone threw a dart at a board covered in news headlines and hit basically everything.
Indeed, it seems like a confluence of interesting events. We have potential government shutdowns, international tensions, trade wars brewing, and even the Supreme Court getting involved in birthright citizenship, a complex interwoven statistical web.
Statistical web is one way to put it. I'd call it a dumpster fire, a very expensive dumpster fire, especially that government shutdown thing again. Can't these guys agree on anything?
Well, let's try to find some positives, maybe. I mean, the article mentions the U.S. is trying to broker a ceasefire in Ukraine. That's got to count for something, right?
Oh, honey, trying is the operative word there. It's like trying to herd cats while juggling flaming torches. Putin's got reservations. Trump's got tariffs. What could possibly go wrong?
The reservations from Putin are noteworthy. He says the ceasefire needs to address the root causes of the crisis. That phrase is usually a prelude to more conflict, not less. We should really analyze the historical precedents of leaders using that specific terminology prior to invasion or expansion.
Exactly. It's always something with him. He says he agrees in principle, but then throws in all these conditions that basically make it impossible. It's a tactic. He's playing Trump like a fiddle, I'm telling you.
But, maybe Trump can actually pull this off. He has a way of getting things done, sometimes. The article mentions his special envoy is in Moscow. That's got to be a positive step, right?
Wickoff in Moscow sounds like the setup for a bad spy movie. I'm picturing a lot of vodka, backroom deals, and maybe a bear wrestling match. Probably more effective than formal diplomacy at this point.
We're dealing with a complex geopolitical dance here. Putin saying the ceasefire needs to address the root causes of the crisis suggests he's aiming for a larger restructuring of the region, potentially demanding concessions that Ukraine is unlikely to accept. I wonder if there is a way to analyze and see the pattern of war, based on human demands and actions.
Restructuring? More like redrawing the map to suit himself. He wants control, plain and simple. And Trump, bless his heart, seems to think he can just strong-arm him into a deal. It's naive.
But isn't any attempt at de-escalation worth exploring? Even if it's a long shot, the potential benefits for the people of Ukraine are huge. A ceasefire, even temporary, could save lives.
Sure, a ceasefire would be great, but I'm not holding my breath. It's more likely to be a brief pause before the next round of unpleasantness, like a commercial break in a really depressing show.
We need to be pragmatic. Trump's approach might be unconventional, but we need to evaluate its effectiveness based on measurable outcomes. Has his strategy, however unorthodox, yielded any tangible progress toward a lasting peace or de-escalation of tensions? What are the odds?
Tangible progress? The guy's threatening to annex Greenland and slapping 200% tariffs on European wine. How's that tangible progress towards anything other than a global trade war? Honestly.
Okay, the tariffs are definitely concerning. But the article also mentions that the U.S. is proposing a deal to release hostages in Gaza in exchange for a longer ceasefire. That seems like a genuinely positive step.
A handful of hostages, that's the key phrase. While the families of the hostages are throwing the celebration, there's like 59 other hostages still chilling in Gaza and thinking about it. I'm sure they're thrilled with the partial credit.
The focus on a handful of hostages, while understandable given the emotional weight of the situation, raises questions about the prioritization of lives. From an impartial perspective, does this allocation of resources and diplomatic effort reflect an equitable value being placed on all human lives involved in the conflict? A comparative study versus other situations could be useful here.
It's always a trade-off, isn't it? You give something to get something. But who decides which lives are worth more? It's a messed up equation.
It's a difficult decision for sure, but at least there's an attempt to negotiate, to find a way to bring some people home and ease the suffering in Gaza. We can't dismiss that entirely.
I'm just saying, let's not pretend it's some massive victory. It's a band-aid on a gaping wound. And speaking of wounds, what's with Trump threatening to annex Greenland? Is he running out of golf courses?
Trump stating the need for Greenland for international security warrants further investigation. What specific quantifiable security benefits does he envision? Is this based on empirical data related to military strategy, resource control, or geopolitical influence? We can't just accept that it's a good idea without quantitative proof.
Quantitative proof? He probably saw a documentary about Vikings and decided we needed more ice. It's that level of strategic thinking, I'm telling you. Maybe he wants the ice to put in his whiskey.
It's probably about resources, right? Greenland has a lot of untapped mineral wealth. That could be a factor in his thinking.
Oh, it's always about the resources and probably the photo op. Trump on a glacier planting a flag. The man lives for the visuals.
Which brings us neatly to the domestic front, namely the impending government shutdown. The article states Democrats don't want to cede power to Trump, but Republicans are blaming Democrats. Another political deadlock.
It's a game of chicken, pure and simple. Who's going to blink first? And who's going to get blamed when the government grinds to a halt? It's tiresome.
But a shutdown would hurt so many people. Federal workers, people relying on government services. It's not a game. It has real-world consequences.
Oh, they know that. That's why they use it as a bargaining chip. It's like holding the economy hostage until you get what you want. So very, very mature.
The article notes Elon Musk's Doge proposing cuts to the IRS workforce. This is a concerning development. Reducing the IRS's capacity could lead to a decrease in revenue collection, impacting essential government operations. This needs a thorough cost-benefit analysis. How does this improve efficiency versus overall revenue collection?
Musk thinks he can run the government like one of his companies. Cut costs, streamline operations, fire anyone who disagrees with him. It's a libertarian fantasy.
But is there any validity to the claim that there's widespread fraud in Social Security? The article mentions Trump and Musk raising questions about it. Maybe there's some room for improvement there.
Ah, the old millions of dead people collecting checks routine. It's a classic, usually trotted out to justify drastic cuts to programs that help actual living people.
The article states the Social Security Administration made nearly $72 billion in improper payments between fiscal year 2015 and 2022, or less than 1% of total benefits paid during that period. That 1% may not be a high number, but it is still a significant amount. It warrants further investigation to what extent is the improper payment due to fraud versus administrative errors and how to reduce this leakage.
See, there is waste. It might not be millions of dead people, but billions are still being lost. That's money that could be used for, well, anything else.
But cutting the IRS isn't the answer. That's like trying to save money on healthcare by firing all the doctors. It's counterproductive.
Exactly. It's penny wise and pound foolish, especially since the article later mentions Trump's threatening 200% tariffs on European alcohol, prompting a trade war with potential ripple effects.
The proposed 200% tariff on European alcohol needs careful analysis. Econometric models could help project the likely impact on the U.S. spirits industry, consumer prices, and retaliatory measures from the EU. We should examine prior instances of similar tariffs to understand the potential long-term effects.
It's just arbitrary. He wakes up one morning and decides to slap a 200% tariff on wine. There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's economic chaos.
And it's going to hurt small businesses. The article quotes the Distilled Spirits Council saying the industry supports 1.7 million jobs. Those jobs are at risk because of this trade war.
Meanwhile, everyone's getting drunker, which is probably the only sensible response to the current state of affairs. Honestly, I'm surprised the tariff isn't higher.
There's also the matter of birthright citizenship. The article mentions the Trump administration asking the Supreme Court to enforce an executive order ending it. This raises profound questions about the legal framework and the definition of citizenship itself.
Finally, someone's addressing this. This idea of birthright citizenship, it's time we revisit it. It's being abused, and it's costing the taxpayers a fortune. Something has to give.
But isn't birthright citizenship a fundamental principle of the Constitution? It's been the law of the land for over a century.
Oh, the Constitution, a document that was famously never misinterpreted or conveniently ignored. The Supreme Court's going to have a field day with this one. Buckle up, folks.
The 14th Amendment states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens. The key phrase is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The legal argument will likely revolve around the interpretation of this phrase. Does it apply to children born to undocumented immigrants or those here temporarily? And how will this affect gene flow and genetic diversity in the future?
That's the whole point. They're not subject to the jurisdiction in the way the founders intended. They're here illegally or temporarily. They haven't pledged allegiance to the country. It's a loophole.
But what about the children themselves? They didn't choose to be born here. Are we going to create a permanent underclass of people who are denied basic rights?
Welcome to America, land of opportunity for lawsuits. This thing's going to be tied up in the courts for years.
Meanwhile, the lawyers get rich, and the rest of us just get more stressed.
There is also mention of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. The Trump administration is considering invoking it to speed up deportations. This is a very aggressive tactic. It's difficult to justify using the act when the U.S. isn't being attacked by a foreign government, even if the administration does cite threats from gangs or cartels. We need to be cautious about giving the government such sweeping power.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. We're being invaded by criminals, by terrorists, by people who don't respect our laws. We need to protect ourselves.
But that law was designed for wartime. Using it against immigrants, even those with criminal records, seems like a massive overreach of executive power. And what about due process?
It's all about optics, folks. Tough on crime, securing the border, making America great again. It's a carefully crafted narrative designed to, well, probably win votes.
The potential use of the Alien Enemies Act also raises ethical questions. Are we willing to sacrifice fundamental principles of due process and legal fairness in the name of national security? What are the long-term consequences of eroding these safeguards?
We're not sacrificing anything. We're protecting ourselves. And as for ethical questions, what about the ethics of people breaking our laws and taking advantage of our system?
There has to be a better way to address immigration and crime than resorting to draconian measures that could violate basic human rights. We need comprehensive reform, not fear-mongering.
Well, good luck with that. Meanwhile, I'm going to stock up on wine before Trump slaps that 200% tariff on it. It's the only rational thing to do, you know.
In conclusion, the current news cycle paints a picture of escalating tensions and policy uncertainty. We face a potential government shutdown, trade wars with allies, debates over birthright citizenship and military de-escalation and extreme executive power. The need for critical analysis, evidence-based decision-making, and a commitment to ethical principles is paramount.
It's a mess, I tell you. A mess. And I don't see it getting any better anytime soon.
But we can't lose hope. We have to keep striving for solutions, for peace, for a more just and equitable world, even if it seems like an uphill battle.
Yeah, hope springs eternal. Meanwhile, I'll be over here, stress eating and waiting for the apocalypse. Thanks for tuning into World Gone Weird, folks. Stay skeptical.